I've been working with this wonderful organization for 25 years, and I cannot tell you how much it's meant to me. This is one of America's great organizations, fighting tolerance and prejudice at all levels of American life. I know the original mission was, in part, large part, to deal with anti-Semitism. But one of the vehicles, the most effective vehicle to fight anti-Semitism, as revealed in our survey, is to fight prejudice of all form. The haters clump together. They dislike everybody, gays, Jews, blacks. So that's the lesson of our work together. A survey measuring attitudes towards Jews in America. All of the ADL work is really voluminous and complicated. This is just one part of the survey. There is also a huge section on the Middle East, a range of issues on tolerance and prejudice generally, but for purposes of this presentation, we're going to keep it very short. The methodology, we interviewed 1,200 people. We oversampled blacks and Hispanics to make sure we had a good, strong look at them. Both communities wound up being 400 inside the survey. The margin of error is very small, 2.9%. The executive summary. This was conducted 10 days after the government shutdown. Obviously, Americans were very grumpy about that. Two major international findings, which we're not going to talk about today. The first is that Americans are extremely leery that Syria will, in fact, give up their chemical weapons, and extremely leery that Iran will not go forward to develop nuclear weapons. The consequence of all this is Israel, which has always had very high standing among the American people, is now at record levels of support. As the region descends into increasing chaos, Israel is seen by the American people as a stable, trusted ally. In fact, the numbers are as high as they've ever been. There's been a lot of talk about the mood of the country based upon the government shutdown. In fact, if you look back at 2011, Americans were grumpy then. So the government shutdown certainly had a calamitous impact upon American public opinion, but anxiety has been concerning for the past 3 or 4 years. President Obama's approval rating, the reason I brought this up is this survey is, in one sense, kind of a prediction of America's future. We interview adults, and we do not interview voters. So what that means is Hispanics are in this survey at their full weight, which is 14% of American adults, and blacks are in this, African Americans are in this survey at 12%. So as a consequence, what you'll see is that President Obama's approval rating is 51-45. That's a bit of an outlier, but Rasmussen, who's a Republican-leaning firm, that's as critics say, had it at 52. John Kerry has a rating of 47-34, so the American people approve of what John has done thus far. There has been a slight improvement in terms of Americans' perception about their own economic condition. 35% believe they're worse off than they were 5 years ago, as opposed to 50 in 2011. But nevertheless, look at those numbers, excellent, 1%. And this is in the face of a lot of good things happening out there. The stock market moving up, housing market recovering. Americans are still deeply stricken and suspicious about the economy. Ratings of world leaders, we tested a few which are worth looking at. Benjamin Netanyahu is in good shape. Hillary Clinton, as she begins a prospective presidential campaign, begins with very strong ratings of the American people, 57-32. And Putin is distrusted by the American people, and Ted Cruz, the recent fashion of the day, is thoroughly disliked, which has been confirmed by many other surveys. Anti-Semitic propensities in 2013. I guess it's appropriate for the year 2000, for the 100th anniversary, that we found the lowest scores that we have in the past 20 years of researching, 12% of the lowest scores matching 1998 and 2009. And the way this works is that there was an index created 50 years ago with 11 questions. There are 11 questions on the right-hand side. Jews stick together more than Americans, like to be the head of things, more loyal to Israel than America, too much power in the US, too much control on influence on Wall Street, too much power in the business world, a lot of irritating faults. They have shady practices, so shrewd others can't compete, don't care about any but their own kind, and just not as honest as other business people. Now these questions in their own way are sort of, the truth is that they work. Inevitably, every year we do this, I always kind of hold on. And then what happens is there's a group of Americans out there who agree to these questions. Our standards are very tough. You have to agree to 6 questions to be considered in the anti-Semitic cohort. So 52% are largely free of prejudice, are totally free of prejudice on the issue of anti-Semitism. 36% are in between, and 12% answered 6 of those 11. If you look at the 11 questions more carefully, it's very, very hard to get to 6. You can get to 3 or 4 maybe, because some of them are slightly ambiguous. You can't get to 6. And if you get to 6, you are finding people who are genuinely anti-Semitic. Now, one of the things that's going on this year, probably true, over all the years, what we found is that concerns about Jewish power drive anti-Semitic propensities. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the concerns are revealed. And these are the views of the most anti-Semitic. So business power, the most anti-Semitic, 78% agree with that premise. 69% believe too much power in Wall Street, and 64% believe too much power in the United States. So they get it. They figure it out. They know what they believe. And then one of the most remarkable findings is that every year I wonder, how is this possibly going to happen? Since 1964, 30% of the Americans have consistently believed that Jews in America are more loyal to Israel than they are to America. And this is in a midst of a rapidly changing, more well-educated population. It's a remarkable finding. I find it baffling. Every year I expect it's going to go down. It did not go down in this year in a Good News survey. Higher levels of education inevitably lead to greater tolerance. One of the lessons of ADL, one of the issues they promote most is that education, higher levels of education breed tolerance. That is certainly the case here. Jews are held in high regard on many, many points. The 11-question index is inside a series of questions, about 35 questions in total. And so what we have found is that even the most anti-Semitic are willing to believe that Jews make a major contribution to the United States, importance of family. They have a strong belief in, they're strong supporters of faith. About 25% of Americans believe that Jews are responsible for the death of Christ. You know, what can I say? We've asked this question. It is unmistakably clear. Jews were responsible for the death of Christ, and obviously people who are anti-Semitic embrace this more than the rest of the population. A quarter of Americans continue to believe that Jews still talk too much about the Holocaust. By the way, among the 30% who believe that Jews are more loyal to Israel, among those who are the most anti-Semitic, 77 believe that canard. And then 50% of Americans who scored 0 to 5 are very free of anti-Semitic. So half the population is fully free of anti-Semitic prejudice. In the past 2 years, anti-Semitic views among the African population have declined. This is a major breakthrough. I mean, this is an important finding. We've been waiting for this number to change. And one of the things that happened in this survey is that technology may have had an impact, which is the use of cell phones is becoming an increasing reality in American survey research. About 30 to 35% of our national samples now include people on their cell phones. And what we did this time was we made absolutely sure among the 400 African Americans we interviewed that we got it up to close to 30%. And I think that that may have contributed somewhat. I do believe there is a larger wave of increased tolerance that's out there. Among Hispanics, different according to birthplace. Hispanics born in the U.S. are really largely free of anti-Semitic prejudices. It is the Hispanics who were born in foreign land, mostly Mexico. And actually, in typical ADL fashion, there was a meeting with some of the Catholic leaders to talk about the influence of the Catholic Church in Mexico. They owned up to the problem. So that right now is the cohort with the most anti-Semitic propensities. The pro-Israeli lobby is seen as much less influential than other well-known political powers. The Pharmaceutical Association, oil lobby are seen to be much more influential than the pro-Israeli lobby. Okay, here is the lesson of ADL. By fighting all forms of prejudice, ADL fights anti-Semitic propensities. There's a high correlation between anti-Semitic beliefs and broader intolerance. One of the quotes I gave a couple of years ago was the seeds of intolerance, they travel together. And that's the way to think about the issue of anti-Semitism. So ADL's mission, fighting prejudice everywhere, simultaneously fights anti-Semitism. A majority of Americans are wary. This is a very fairly worded question, basically saying, let's have a pathway to citizenship for the immigrants who are here not illegally. And 52% agree with that. They're wary about it. However, the big news is 2/3 of Americans continue to support the DREAM Act, which is a pathway to citizens for for young Hispanic kids. Go to college, go to the military, 2/3 support it. Since 2007, Americans' approval of gay marriage has sharply increased. We have watched this transformation, and it's really remarkable. 10 years ago, it was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We asked the question, I think, properly, which is there are three choices: gay marriage, civil unions, or no recognition whatsoever. And this year, for the first time, 45%. I know there's been recent reporting saying that a majority of Americans now support gay marriage. I think the three-part question is the way to ask it. So this is a phenomenal transformation of deeply held American beliefs. A sense of alienation among Americans is unchanged. The government doesn't really care about me. That's the classic alienation question. It is now at 60% to 37%. And you can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it. The shutdown contributed to this sense of alienation. And then if you want a really whopping finding, the depths of alienation are strikingly revealed by this conspiratorial belief. There is a small group of businessmen and government leaders who meet secretly to make our country's most important decisions. 62% of the American people believe this takes place. I mean, we've looked at the words have clear meaning, but Americans continue to believe that religion is losing its influence in public life, contrary to many of us who believe that religion has increased its influence, especially with the Tea Party's influence. 71% of the American people believe that religion is losing its influence in American life. This issue was tested thoroughly in the survey. Americans have a strong belief in the separation of church and state on the left, but they believe religious symbols like the Ten Commandments should be displayed in public buildings such as courthouses, 62-32. That informs the way Americans think about this. They have conflicting views on a range of issues, this being one of them. And then most Americans believe in evolution, but are surprisingly receptive to the biblical story of creation being taught. On the right-hand slide, do you favor or oppose teaching the biblical story of creation along the scientific theory of evolution as equally valid explanations for the origins of human life? 52% agree, 42% disagree. That tells you your battles are still in front of you. So that is it. And that, as I said, is a very short summary of a survey that had at least 120 questions, a huge foreign policy component, and many, many, many more questions on the issue of fundamental prejudice and tolerance. The question is regional impact, whether this data works regionally. The South is a little tougher on some of these key issues, but by and large, lower educated Americans, older Americans, are not surprisingly likely to carry around more prejudicial views, and that's been consistent throughout. As the population ages, you would hope that the new 65-pluses would be more tolerant, but it's still a predictor. Again, education, education, education. More education creates increased tolerance. When you look at the kids today, under 35 years old, who are part of the new, well-educated generation, their views are just astonishingly free of prejudicial attitudes. It's a great advance.
Unfortunately, there are bigots in this world, and I'm just curious from your studies, if those people do you identify as anti-Semitic, if there's some baseline that a bigot is a bigot, and those that are anti-Semitic would also test being anti-black, anti-gay, anti-Hispanic, and so forth.
Earlier, these viruses travel together. Haters hate, and they just don't hate Jews. They hate a range of people, a range of cohorts. They are tough, and that's the way to think about it. That's why the mission of ADL is so crucially important. You can't fight anti-Semitism without fighting the broader seeds of intolerance and prejudice in the country.
The numbers you're showing us are heartening when the levels of prejudice drop, but I'm wondering whether a drop from 15% to 12% is really statistically significant.
It is, the way we do it, it is. I mean, I think that we have, the total universe that we interviewed is 1,700 people. And so that creates kind of micro percentages. 15 to 12 is a meaningful drop. I think the future progress will be slow. It'll be incremental is the best way to say it. But I'm heartened by it. And I think that the gradual impact of young people, and Hispanics, by the way, are going to be a huge influence. And I'm hopeful that the younger Hispanic Americans will lead the ways to reducing this within them. Foreign-born Hispanics are tough. When we talk to Hispanic respondents, we give them the option to be interviewed in Spanish. And that's a big difference, because those Hispanics who prefer Spanish are more likely to be conservative. There's a famous story in 2004 when John was running for president, John Kerry. That rigorous approach was not applied to some of the research, and it overstated John's support. Bush got 42% of the vote. A lot of his vote was secured among foreign-born Hispanics, people who still identified very significantly with their homeland.
You pointed out a dramatic increase in the acceptance of marriage equality over the last relatively very few years. Have you been able to correlate that change to other changes in your survey?
Well, the anti-Semitic are the most anti-gay. So there's a one-to-one correlation. But what you're witnessing here, I can't think of a comparable change of American attitudes on an issue that is about values that has moved in such a breathtaking way. It's an extraordinary move. And the great thing about ADL is we have so much data that goes way back. In the early 2000s, it was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 for marriage, 1/3 for recognition of gay unions, 1/3 against. And there was movement in all three categories. The big movement is into support for gay marriage.
Religious freedom work, would you comment a little bit more on the findings about evolution versus creationism?
Well, you know, the reason the survey is replete with questions on religion and religious belief and the way they affect the public debate, you know, I think you've got work to do. I mean, this is really, not that you don't have other issues to work on, but throughout the survey, there is Americans believe religion is losing its influence. Americans believe that Christianity is under attack. Americans believe by huge margins, by 2 to 1, that Christianity is under attack. So as we, more secular elites, watch the headlines, we say, well, you know, religion is certainly robust. I mean, their presence in the national debate is robust. In fact, Americans believe the reverse. And then, to me, the attitudes on evolution, that's a shocking finding. And actually, at the end of the survey, after all the demographics, so that this question would not contaminate it, we asked people whether living things have existed in their current form, in their current, all living things, basically the 6,000-year argument, or people have evolved. 35% of the American people believe that human beings have existed in this form since the beginning of time. That's a big number. That's a big number. It's a big number. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's hard to tell what's going to happen. There's kind of as the population changes and becomes ever more Hispanic and ever more minority. By the way, blacks and Hispanics are very religious, conservative religious forces. So they are on the upside of those kinds of questions.
With the lesser role of religion in American life, I was surprised that in your survey, people wanted the 10 Commandments to remain in the courtroom. I certainly believe in the separation of church and state, but if you polled me, I might say, gee, in every courtroom I've ever been, even in the U.S. Supreme Court, there's been the 10 Commandments. And so is there a role for the Ten Commandments to be in the courtroom? It might just be you're used to them being there. They're comforting. Thou shalt not steal, and so forth. So is it really religiosity, or is it just custom or comfort that you want them in there? What do you think is driving Americans to want them to be there?
You know, I think that Americans want it both ways. They want separation of church and state, but they want more religion in our lives.
As you know, there's been a great deal of discussion over the last, as long as I can remember, about the rates of intermarriage. So presuming in your sample there are no Jews in that sample, or are there Jews in that sample?
2.5%.
Okay, so it's the way the population.
Right.
Okay. So is there any data on correlating whether someone in the family had married a Jew with anti-Semitic attitudes, and even over time? Because I've always thought that even though at the one hand we fear intermarriage, on the other hand, maybe that's the reason that some of these anti-Semitic attitudes have fallen when people get to know Jews and their families.
Well, I think as Jewish contact becomes more extensive with the rest of the population, it obviously reduces it. By the way, the Pew study on American Jews, for those of you who have not seen it, I think it was published in the past couple months, is an extraordinary study and really deserves major attention, in which they talk about the levels of assimilation and intermarriage and all of that. I was shocked by the level of movement, I mean not movement, but the level of change that's taking place within the Jewish community on this issue, for sure. But as, for sure, we've known this from research, as people meet and know Jewish Americans, their levels of anti-Semitism goes down. Similarly, as people meet and know gay Americans, their support for gay marriage goes up.
Could you discuss a little bit your statistical decline of anti-Semitism among African American that you polled?
You know, in part, I think that there is increased tolerance, but I'll say it again. This is also, part of that decline is attributable to our increased use of cell phone, really making sure that we maintain the same level of cell phone participation as we did for the entire population, thereby bringing in younger, more hip African Americans into the sample. So, but I think there was real movement regardless of the cell phone equation. We've been very conscious of cell phone use for years and years and years. This is hardly new stuff. But this time we made double duty. And in fact, what's going on right now is the world of survey research has been transformed by the cell phone participation inside these national surveys. We are heading towards something like 40%. That is a big number. I think younger Americans, younger African Americans, are gradually replacing older African Americans. By definition, their experience is much more diverse. They are much more tolerant. I mean, if you look at the world of entertainment and television and so forth, it's a more diverse place. So it's not surprising to me. It's reassuring and gratifying that this change is beginning to finally take place. By the way, this is typical of ADL. When we began to find these numbers years back, we convened some of the most distinguished African American scholars, including Henry Gates, to say, hey guys, what's going on here? We don't understand this data, help us understand it. And this went on, I think we had a couple meetings, Ken? This was serious stuff. This is typical ADL, which is to look at this issue from the most serious way. And frankly, I must admit, these were very smart guys, the top of the academic world. They couldn't quite explain it to me in a way that I found satisfactory. But again, as an example of ADL's research, they were challenged at this meeting to say, what about Jews? How about American Jews and their attitudes towards African American and civil rights? So as a result of that meeting, in addition to meeting with them, we conducted a national survey of American Jews to measure their attitudes towards the civil rights movement and so forth. American Jews are so tolerant. It's unbelievable. And that survey was a ringing endorsement of Jewish values on issues of discrimination.
Do you have information on the difference of attitudes towards Jews between Latinos who have been here for a long time or who've been born here, and Latinos who just recently arrived in the United States?
We don't do it that way. What we've done is we've done foreign-born Hispanics and native-born Hispanics. Presumably, people who have come here recently are coming from foreign-born, so they are inside that cohort. So that's our major breakout, which is foreign-born Hispanics. And that is, I think, really, I think we found, throughout our research, we have found many, many answers. That's one of them for sure. And again, ADL met with Catholic leaders to talk about their responsibility. Catholic leaders owned up to anti-Semitic teachings, practices within the church in Mexico. It was talked about. And so it was not an issue that they backed away from. They owned up to it and they said, yes, that is the case. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.